I'm Marcus Smith, and this is Constant Wonder. Join me on a quest to find awe and wonder in all creation, human or wild, vast or small, spiritual encounters that move us beyond words. Zandile Ndhlovu, known as the Black Mermaid, has the distinction of being the first ever Black African freediving instructor in South Africa. Freediving, diving with no supplemental oxygen.
I believe in breath, and I think once you realize the power of breath, you realize how much you do with it.
On a single dive, Zandile can hold her breath for an astonishing 4 minutes and 45 seconds. This takes unblinking focus, strict attention to one's own body. As you descend, water pressure mounts, compressing the lungs. You can't panic. You need to keep track of the rope that leads you back to the boat. You can't rise to the surface too quickly, and this all requires intense concentration, supreme mindfulness. And yet, this is the place where Zandile Ndhlovu feels most free, where the usual constraints of life melt away for her. There is a paradox in feeling most free underwater where we cannot breathe, but she insists this is the case for her, and few things are as meaningful to her as leading others to this kind of freedom, awakening others to the power of breath. It needn't be anywhere near water, actually. Zandile's story is as much about life on land as about the wonders below the surface. Zandile Ndhlovu's passion for the ocean might seem surprising for somebody who didn't learn how to swim until nearly a teen. She's from Soweto in Johannesburg, South Africa, more than 6 hours from any ocean beach. The landscapes she knew best were overwhelmingly dry and brown, very little greenery.
So if you can picture minimal trees, minimal nature, more brown than anything else. And we were kids that played outside. You'd find us in the street playing all kinds of games. But in all of the play, nature was never a part of it. And the closest that we had, like as a relationship to water, every single year when spring came around, every single September 1st, everyone would grab a bucket from their house and there's water inside of it. And we're running around in the streets and throwing each other with water. And you're just celebrating in the streets. That's the only way we knew how to usher spring in.
While Zandile loved growing up where she did, playing outside, raised without TVs and screens, that springtime ritual was just about the extent of her childhood exposure to large amounts of water. There was a community pool, but that wasn't part of Zandile's life experience.
We actually did have a pool in the vicinity, maybe like 5 streets away, but to be able to access the pool was 50 cents. And 50 cents today sounds like very little, but at that time, my mother never had it. And so every single time you'd walk past that pool, it was blue and crisp and pristine because a lot of the kids in the community could not access that pool. So that's the interesting dynamics of living in a township, right? There were the kids whose parents were nurses and teachers and policemen, and often they would go to schools that were outside the community, so private schools and maybe even multiracial schools, and the rest of us went to the schools that were in the community. And so there were kids who had means. And of course, you know how it is. There's always a classist system in anywhere that you live.
At about the age of 11, Zandile did finally get a chance to swim in a pool when she attended her first ever multiracial school and had a PE class there. She was in grade 6.
My teacher said to the class, everybody jump into the water. And I obviously didn't know how to swim. And my first instinct was to, follow instruction. And there was a girl, I'll never forget her. Her name's Trevlyn, bless her soul. She says to me, don't worry about it, get on my back. And I will swim you over to the other side. And I was like, okay, cool. And she swims us over to the other side, makes a turn. And I don't think it was intentional, but I fall off her back in the deep end and she swims to the other side. And I ended up being underwater and pretty much coming very close to drowning when my teacher got me out the water and they had to actually get the water out of my system. Like, Zandi, are you okay? It was actually crazy. I properly drowned.
As close as this call was, it didn't scare her off from swimming.
The following year, my sister and I tried to get on the swimming team. And if anything, we might have been able to what do you call it, to doggy paddle? And even when we joined the swim team, we would be like the last people to finish like every single lap. But I think there was something inside of us that wanted to try because, again, we were also, I think at that time, the only Black kids that were even trying to go for that.
Just as Zandile didn't grow up swimming at the public pool, neither did her family vacation by the ocean, which was 300 miles away.
We lived in a lovely house, actually, but we did not have like holidays as you would picture it. So like I have friends who say when we were little, we always went to the beach every December or every June. We never had that. And so my first time coming across the ocean, I must have been 12 years old. And my mom wanted to go see her family in the Eastern Cape. And that was easily one of our biggest treks.
The family traveled there in a pickup truck, or what the South Africans call a bakkie.
And I just remember this long, long way and this massive mountain and like sitting in the back of this bakkie and being thrown around as the bakkie eventually makes it down to the mountain where her dad lived. And then later we then went to see the rest of the family. And that's where the ocean was, these big, incredible waters. And I still remember thinking this is a very wild place.
So what do you remember about what happened that day? It was a completely new kind of place, back when you had your very first encounter with the ocean.
My sister and I were wearing the same bikinis that had Tweety and Minnie Mouse or something like that. It was like one of those Disney characters. And I just remember we had our cousins and they would go into the water and come out. And this water was just like charging with them. The waves are like crashing ahead of them. And I just remember thinking, this is exciting. And my sister and I run in and we ran out, obviously, but there was a time that we went in and we went a little bit further. And my mother's like, what do you guys think you're doing? And the water must have been just below our knees. And she's like, why are you trying to kill yourselves? Get back out. And so for us, going to the beach was always splashing in the shallows because if the water got above your knee, the question was, why are you trying to kill yourself? If the water was at your ankle, you were doing great. You're playing at the perfect place. And I realized that that was important, right? Because our parents don't know how to swim. There were no lifeguards on the beach. And so the idea that if anything had to happen and your body is taken, there's nothing that anybody can do. And so from a safety perspective, it was a stay within the place where I can still grab you and get you out of the water. And yeah, I just remember big, big laughs. And I think the water's always been alive, charged and full of energy and scary and big and massive. And in all of its big, who could have ever imagined the amount of life that lives just past her breaking point?
The grown-up Zandile would get to see firsthand how much life really is there below the surface of those massive breaking waves. But from her family, the adolescent Zandile received little encouragement to pursue her growing fascination with the sea. The adults in her life often expressed their fear this way.
My grandmother lived in an area that had a river nearby. And at that river, there would often be drownings. And because the bodies would never be found, it would always be the snake took them. So we always grew up with stories around bodies of water and why we should stay away from them. When we got to the sea, it's you don't want to go too far in because you'll get taken by the snake. And so it was a continuous narrative that told us we had to stay away from the water. And that was that.
So from that experience as a young girl, there was a long hiatus before you really encountered and spent time with the ocean. A lot of time to think about that, I would imagine.
Yeah, because you get to go home and tell all the kids in the township about what you saw, right? And it's these beautiful stories that you tell that everyone else will hopefully see one day later in their lives. And you kind of like shelf it away because you don't know when it will happen again, right? It didn't start as a vacation. It started as, I need to go see my family. There's a situation that needs to be handled. And so when would be the next family situation that needs to be handled? But yeah, it would take over 10 years before I would have my moment with her fully.
It was well over a decade from Zandile's first ocean swim until the time when she would have her moment fully with the sea, as she says. In the meantime, she had advanced from dog paddling to more adept swimming. And after graduation from high school, her mother signed her up for a gym.
Even when you see me today, you can tell that I'm not a trained swimmer. And yes, I can hold my own, but it's not perfect, nor beautiful, nor dolphin-like, but it works. But essentially, it was at that gym that I would learn to do an entire lane, starting with half rest, try again, rest, try again, rest. And that would happen for years after that, maybe like 4 or 5 years.
By the time Zandile was 28, she had established herself as an IT professional working in customer relations. And she was married, although that relationship was not going well. This was in 2016.
I was going through a hard time. I was traditionally married, and this human pretty much said that he wanted out of the marriage. And it was his third time saying that he wanted out. And I just remember looking at him and thinking, you've got it. And the first thing I did was get onto my email and see where I could go. Like, where could I go to help comprehend what's going on? Where do I go to find language to tell my family that I've failed at this thing that everybody else has gotten right? Where do I go to just hide and think and just get my head straight so that I can talk to my family? Anyway, I email a travel agent and I say, hi, listen, this is how much I have. Where can you take me? I need to at least go for 2 weeks. And the lady gets back to me and she says, Bali. We can get you to Bali, and the first week will be this, and then the second week you'll go there, and then you'll come back into the country. And I said, great. And this was my first solo trip that was international. So I'm a little bit scared. I'm a little bit excited. Anyway, I get to Bali and I have this entire first week in Kuta. It's got a beach, but it's like, city-like. And I figure that I want to learn to surf a little bit. And so I spent maybe 5 hours every single day on the water on just the surfboard. And I'd fall over in every direction, but it made me so happy. And then the following week, I end up going to Gili Trawangan, which is where I have my first ever snorkel trip. We get our kit, which is fins, mask, snorkel. And I just remember the fear as the boat left the beach. I was so afraid. And the questions that were going through my head were, if anything goes wrong, what are you going to say to your family? Like, what am I even doing here? And it was wild and there was big swell. And we eventually get to our snorkel spot. And the captain says, everybody kit up. Obviously, I don't know what that means. So I'm kind of looking around to see what everybody else is doing so I can start doing it. And in the midst of this moment, this lady, I'll never ever forget her. She had a hijab on. And she says to me, have you ever been snorkeling before? Obviously, because, I have big eyes. Probably my eyes are like sticking out my skull. And I shake my head and I say, no, I haven't. And so then she said, why aren't you asking for help? I'm like, I would have figured it out where I come from. We figure things out. And if I'm honest, I would have never figured it out. We would not be here without that lady. Anyway, she holds up the mask, puts it on my face, and she says, always remember, you won't be able to breathe through your nose when you have your mask on. And this is a snorkel. This is how you put it in your mouth. I'm 28 years old. I have no idea what's going on. Anyway, so she says, remember, that's how you breathe if you go too far forward and there's water, but you'll be fine. Cool as, cool and the gang. And the captain says, everybody jump off. And so we jump into the water. I freak out. I'm drowning. It's a whole mess. Oh my God, I'm drowning. It was crazy. And I'm the only Black person on the boat, obviously. And this other lady turns around and she says to me, it's physically impossible to drown. And I'm like, dear lady, I just told you I'm drowning. And she's like, physically impossible. And in this moment of physically impossible is my own self to self. Hi, Zizi. What's going on? You know how to swim. What's going on? And I think the biggest fear was that my feet couldn't touch the ground, right? So I had been in a swimming pool where if anything goes wrong, you can just get to the ledge and hold on. And all of a sudden, there's nothing to hold on to. Your feet are not touching the ground. There's just so much going on. And there's a sense of calm, self to self. Calm down. Just join the group. And I just remember my first few strides following the group was awe, absolute awe. I couldn't figure out what was going on. It was mind-blowing. The blues were so blue. And I eventually catch up to the group, and there's these yellow fish that come up just on the surface, but bright, bright yellow. And you look down at the bottom and there's the coral, but the coral looks like it's lit up from beneath, but that's the sun that's dancing on the coral bed. It was the most beautiful thing I'd seen. And then somewhere along the way, this moray eel makes its way through, and I'm just like, that looks like me. It was easily one of the days that I will never ever forget in my life. And as all of this is unfolding, our dive leader keeps on diving down, right? He keeps on diving down, and he comes up with these shiny shells, right? And everybody's holding onto a shell. And I'm holding onto this shell and I'm thinking, why is it so shiny? Who shines the shells? What's going on?
For all the joy Zandile Ndhlovu was feeling, when the group moved to a new dive spot, the experience of being under the surface transformed something in her core, some sense of her own place in the world.
For me, looking beneath the surface, there was awe, but it was almost like this belief system that I've always had. There's no one normative, right? And I was living in a world plagued with the idea of one normative, and that normative is white, and everyone else is othered. And looking under there, seeing those little fish, seeing this honeycomb moray, seeing these little beautiful shells with life inside of them, in the ocean, there was no one normative. Everything was the most normal thing. There was no standard of how anybody had to look. And it was just the most freeing feeling. And so we get to the second spot, and from watching the dive master, he kept on diving down. I eventually dived down and I follow him. And I must have held my breath for maybe 15 or 20 seconds. And the most incredible feeling in my body landed. Like it was a feeling of finally being home. Like all of a sudden, I wasn't an oddball. I wasn't an outsider. There was a place where I belong. And that changed my life. And then we got to the third spot and it was incredible. And everybody on the boat was teasing me. How do you go from half drowning to diving behind the guy and holding your breath? And it was hilarious. And we all laughed about it at lunch. But that day, my world had changed and everything was okay.
You know, there's not a lot of people who can point back to something that grand and say, that was the day when my perspective changed. That is a rare story, I think. When you're holding that shiny shell or looking down at the coral that seems backlit, were you having any ideas or were you just there?
I was in awe. I couldn't believe how vivid the colors were. I couldn't believe that there was a world where I could belong without any explanations. I couldn't believe that there was such beauty and how different it could all look, and it was all the most beautiful thing you could ever imagine. And I always think back to that first honeycomb moray eel that I saw. People will always say morays are scary, moray eels are scary, and I didn't think that. When I first saw that moray eel, I literally pointed it and I was like, hey, that looks like me. And everybody laughs at me to this day. Like, they're like, what does that even mean? And I say, they look scary, but they're not. They have their mouths open because they're trying to breathe and stuff. That's about it. And I think it was beautiful to find a beautiful animal that felt like it held a bit of my spirit, because I'd always just spoken my mind, a straight talker, and the world would always like misconstrue, like, why are you so hard? But I wasn't hard. I was just saying what I'm saying. And all of a sudden there was this moray that just felt gentle and beautiful and scary looking to a lot of people, but for me, the most beautiful animal I'd ever seen. And I think for me, it was a coming home. That's all it was. It was coming home to myself, and it was coming home to the questions that I'd always had around belonging and maybe just having a place.
Zandile Ndhlovu is founder of the Black Mermaid Foundation. Her children's book, Zandi's Song, is out in the U.S. in March 2024. In a moment, how the ocean connected Zandile with what her ancestors believed about the afterlife. I'm Marcus Smith, and you're listening to Constant Wonder. Earlier in our story, we heard about a snake that lives in the waters and would snatch South Africans who ventured in too deep, the monster that Zandile Ndhlovu was warned against as a child. But now here's another belief that Zandile grew up with, this one not so much sinister as it is sacred.
We were just told that there's ancestors at the bottom of the ocean. It's a sacred place. And I still to this day get into these conversations that say, when you go deep, do you see anything that looks human-like? And so there's always the question that says, have you encountered the ancestors? Or have you encountered mermaids? Or have you encountered the big snake? For me, I always say, I do believe that the ocean is a sacred place. And I don't know if there's ancestors at the bottom of the ocean, but I can tell you that I feel at home when I'm deep down there. I feel at home. I feel outside of my body. I feel outside of every world I've ever known. So it's an interesting place.
And who would have been asking these questions of you? Have you seen the ancestors or their remains?
Everybody. When Black people come up to me to talk about the ocean, the first question is, but have you seen a mermaid? Have you seen anything that is human-like? And I say, I haven't, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. So most Black people will ask me those questions first. So like, what do you mean we can go in there? Can we all go in there? And I think, again, traditionally and tribally, it might be said that not all people can be water people. It depends on your clan and your tribal agreements if your ancestors might take you if you go into the water. So it's an interesting and complex discussion.
Yeah. Is there a part of you that wants to educate people about... I mean, this is a judgment value on my part, so forgive me. But I mean, do you want to disabuse anybody of superstition, for example?
Thank you so much for placing it that way, Marcus, because I have this big belief that I'm not here, nor do I live to disprove any belief. I believe there is something to any and every belief. I don't know about the snake. I don't know about mermaids, and I don't know about ancestors. And so for me, I believe that we can hold two truths at the same time. If we believe that the bottom of the ocean is sacred, can we go there and worship? Can we meet the ocean at the place where we recognize that this is a sacred place? Are we able to bring our worship? Are we able to be present? Are we able to let our laughter be a place that just brings joy to those that have been before us? So for me, I always feel the need to never disprove anything. I always say, I only know as much as I've seen. And I've never had the deep plague to try and tell anybody that anything doesn't exist.
Is it really limited, though, to your eyes and what you've seen? Or are there other ways of apprehending what the ocean is about and maybe that space of the ancestors that doesn't necessarily have to do with your eyes?
I completely agree with you. And so even the space of the ancestors, I'll always say, for me, the way I feel at the bottom of the ocean is like no other place. And so I agree that it's more than just seeing, but it's feeling. But also for me, I always say I'm a Black person that comes from a Black people that have always had big beliefs. And I don't want the Western normative to be the only normative through which I approach life, where we are only referencing Western science as an idea of what can and can't live in the water. So I always want to stand in the roots of my bloodline to say, there are things that we will know, there are things that we won't know, but I don't want to lead with only the Western narrative on surely there aren't water humans and surely ancestors could never be. For me, it is just to place what I've seen, but also how I feel, right? And when I talk to my grandmother, she asks me all these questions and I just say, Gogo, I've seen it or I haven't seen it. I always say, there's nothing in the ocean that wants to harm you. Maybe let's start there. And for me, it is a place of worship. So whether it is with ancestors or without, I'm not out of reach from our own belief systems. And I like to allow life to unfold the way she wants to unfold. It's not for me to assume anything of her.
Zandile's first snorkeling experience on her trip to Bali, that alone was life-changing. Bali represents her first underwater epiphany. With the passage of time and more experience in this watery new world, she came to think of the ocean as a place of untold beauty and even a place of worship, a place of ancestors. But we haven't even yet gotten to freediving with its daunting requirements. Zandile hadn't ever heard about the practice when her journey began, and freediving is the thing that would bring her the nickname the Black Mermaid.
So I go from Bali, I'm in love. I'm in love. I want to know, what's next? What do people do after this snorkeling? Everyone's like, scuba diving, of course. Go scuba diving. 2017, I end up going on this Discover Scuba course. And we start in the pool. They're showing us how to be in the water. We go out on the boat, we get into the water. And as beginner divers, we're all holding each other's hands like this. And we're all going down to the bottom of the ocean. And when we get to the bottom, we land on our knees and we're still holding hands. And we have to do some of the skills, but we're also looking around. And that moment for me was another mind-blowing moment because I'm like, how are we breathing underwater? And that was my first encounter, breathing underwater with the ocean. Later on, I then go on to my open water dives, become open water certified, become advanced certified, become deep certified, become nitrox certified. So I'm incredibly certified in scuba. But in all those moments in scuba, it almost felt like the most incredible world, witnessing the life that lives beneath the surface. But it also felt like you were in a bus. And so it's like there's a dive master and he's like, to your left is a turtle. To your right is a ragged tooth shark. To your left is a parrotfish. And I think I needed it before I started my journey into freediving. I needed to go deep. I needed to see what was there. I needed to address my own internal narratives of, could I be there? Am I allowed to be here? And I think it was a journey of walking from that first wonder to making sure that I would always have home here. And it was amazing, but I knew that something was missing. 2018, I'm on Instagram and I'm scrolling and I see these girls diving without tanks. I'd never seen anything like that before. So I'm like, what's going on here? What daylight witchery is this? How do people do witchery in the day? What's going on? And they're diving down and there are these green little seabeds, grass-looking seabeds. And then at a point there's a tiger shark. And in all of this, they don't have tanks on their back. And I'm thinking, stop the lorry. So I go into Google and I say diving without tanks. And it says freediving.
You actually had to Google that?
I had to Google it because I did not know what it was. So I start looking up freediving instructors South Africa. In December, I end up being in Cape Town and there was this freediving company here and they said they offer a Discover Freediving mission.
Now, just because Zandile was excited about this new way of being in the sea, that did not mean she wasn't apprehensive.
I was so afraid that one breath going all the way down there, what happens if I see something that comes from my childhood? What happens if I run out of breath? What happens if I swallow the sea? What happens if I die? In freediving, there is no, can somebody give me a breath? I still laugh at the instructor from that course because, oh my gosh, how I did not pull that man's head off when we had to do some of the skills because I was so afraid.
Zandile pushed past her fears and continued to train in freediving. About 6 months later, she was in Soweto Bay on a short trip when she discovered the only freediving instructor training that the Professional Association of Diving Instructors offered in South Africa, and the instructor was just about to start a 2-week certification class. Now, Soweto Bay is about 350 miles from her home in Johannesburg, where she and a business partner were running their own consulting company.
So I call my business partner and I'm like, buddy, I know I said I'm coming back, but I'm not. I can't leave. I promise every day at 3 o'clock, I'll log in and we can go through whatever it is that needs to be done, but I can't come back. And from that first moment, just in the pool, holding my breath, there was that feeling of home, that feeling of belonging. Let me tell you, when we went out to the ocean, I was afraid, but of our group, I also had the longest breath hold, and at the end, dived the deepest.
Free diving certification levels are connected with how deep you can dive: 10 meters, 20, 32 meters for mastery level, meaning that master divers can dive to 109 feet. Free divers use a weighted rope that often has distances clearly marked on it. It's really a world that's difficult for me to comprehend. I mean, the deepest I've ever been in a pool is maybe 4 meters tops, just a dozen feet down, and that was more pressure than my ears ever thanked me for. I had to know from Zandile what really deep dives do to a body, starting with the ears. Apparently, free divers do this thing called equalizing. It's probably something any one of us have done on an airplane or coming down a mountain pass, perhaps. You pinch your nose and gently blow.
When you close your nose and you exhale, you help to equalize your eardrum. Because it's concave, when the pressure goes in, you bring it back to being straight. So the whole idea of equalizing is the hope that you don't burst your eardrum, because your eardrum will burst from the pressure of the water. The pressure, you do feel it, obviously. You feel it in your ears, but then it changes the gas volume in your lungs. You feel that pressure by your buoyancy level. When you begin your dive, you're positively buoyant. You dive into the water and you have to dive to about 10, 12 meters to get to being neutrally buoyant. And from about 12, 13 meters, you begin to just drop. Without finning, you just drop to the bottom.
This is called free fall. The diver is head down with one arm held close to the body, the other bent and tucked close to the body, with a hand close to the nose to be ready to equalize again during the descent. The diver does not kick with the fins anymore at this point, but just lets gravity do its work and conserves energy, keeping the body parallel to the dive rope, head down still. A diver at depth is what you call a diver not engaged with exploring marine life, but only intent on reaching a certain depth. Such a diver wears a lanyard that hooks on one end around their wrist, waist, or ankle, and on the other end slides loosely up and down the weighted dive rope in order to stay tethered.
You just drop to the bottom, and that talks to the gas volumes in your body. That pressure is twice the amount of surface pressure at 10 meters, and then it just increases. So at 20 meters, you're at 3 times pressure. So your lung volume, your gas volume is a third of its full value, just from just concentrating the air inside your lungs. And that's how you end up being negatively buoyant. And so you feel that pressure, but you feel it more from your breath and your ears and your mask. In all your air spaces, you'll feel that pressure. But aside from that, it's just, once you become negatively buoyant, I don't know what it is. It feels like flying through space, and you combust and you become absolutely every planet and star that's around you.
This is a common observation of free divers, that the free fall becomes like a Zen state.
And you don't have a body, you don't have a physical being until you get to the bottom of your dive. And there you are at 30 meters, at 35 meters, and you only know you're there because your lanyard just hooked on the edge of the tennis ball at the bottom of the dive. And you're like, oh, here I am. And you're kind of looking around. I always close my eyes when I go to depth.
To flip the lyrics of an old song, what goes down must come up.
You kind of come back to this body and you begin your ascent. And it's interesting because once you begin your ascent, just like in the beginning, when you're positively buoyant and you have to fin to get down, you have to fight to get out, right? Because it's hard.
Remember that gravity had pulled the diver down effortlessly in the freefall descent.
And you have to fight till about 15 meters, then you get to 10 meters and you begin to become neutrally buoyant again and positively buoyant again because the gas volume is expanding again in your lungs and it pulls you back up to the surface.
So, back to Zandile's quest to hit those depth milestones. The day she hit 20 meters, that's 65.5 feet, that day was marked for Zandile by some special companions who were nearby.
The ocean was choppy, it was windy, it was crazy. You're trying to breathe through your snorkel and water is just filling up at the top. And so it was a hot mess. But my instructor always said, you need to be able to free dive through all conditions. Anyway, that first dive that I do was starting off. And you hear this crazy noise in the background. It's a wild noise. So humpback whales were in the background. And I'll never forget the day I got to 20 meters because I went down with whale song. And so that entire dive was just the most beautiful song.
Back at the boat, after she finished that qualifying dive,
We begin to hear these sounds around us. The whales had come to investigate what was going on because obviously they can feel our breath, they can feel our freediving.
as thrilled as she was to have proven she could descend to 20 meters, that milestone quickly became a wall. It felt like her upper, or rather her lower, limit, a mental block. Freedivers often take down a dive computer watch. It tracks their depth.
Every single time I got to 23 meters, no matter if I had my computer on, whether I had my eyes open or closed, my body would just get rigid. And I would just start panicking and just start surfacing back up.
The mental block didn't dissuade her from testing herself again and again.
It was a crazy time, but easily one of the most beautiful times because I had found her and I had found her face again and we were one again. And I was so in love with freediving, you couldn't get me to stop.
Whose face? One with whom? This is spiritual language.
I think worship for me is being present wherever it is that we are in worship. And I think because when I freedive, the only place that I can be is in the here and now, in her body, that for me is a state of worship. And her is the water, right? I think the ocean is alive. The water holds so much energy. Wherever you go, the waters are different and they hold energy and they speak. And so for me, it is to enter into the sacred, and the sacred is the ocean, and the ocean is, for me, she's a being. I reference her all the time. I think she's the big mother. I think she's the great mother.
That feeling of coming home, of being one with the sea, it would drive Zandile Ndhlovu to conquer her fear of going deeper than 65 feet. And that in itself is an impressive achievement. It allowed her to certify as a freediving instructor. But while pursuing that technical challenge, her life understanding would expand in other ways. The ocean, Zandile would learn, is, yes, a place to discover natural wonders in marine life, yes, a place to test the limits of your physical stamina, but very profoundly, it's a place to discover who you are in heart and spirit, who you are holistically. She'll share more with us on this fundamental kind of self-knowledge in just a moment. You're listening to Constant Wonder. I'm Marcus Smith.
So while we were in Sodwana Bay, I only got to 23 meters. So I had passed my advanced course, but I could not get to the master level because I was just so afraid. Then followed a 7-month training spree back home in Joburg in a quarry. A quarry is like an old mine that's filled with water and it has horrible visibility. But that was where I had the second connection to the water. It almost felt like it was a reminder from the ocean that said, who the hell do you think you are? You come from wherever it is that you come from, and you tell me that you want 30 meters from me. I don't care if you have the breath hold. Like, you're going to learn my face. You're going to learn to bend with the water. You're going to learn what it means to be here. I took off my diving computer. I started diving by feel. I wanted my body to be comfortable. I didn't want to know how deep I was, where I was. And it was such an incredible journey of learning my body, calming my mind, being present and not being in the future of what I wanted. It was not about 15 meters, 20 meters, 30 meters. It was just about being here with this body. What am I feeling? Do I still have space? And just from that time of training and playing, and in the quarry, they also had this bus and they had a helicopter underneath. And so they didn't have marine life, but they had things that you could play around in. And so I remember, diving into the bus, sitting down, coming back up. All of a sudden, I could play with my breath hold. A few months later, my instructor comes to Joburg and he says, "Hey, Zan, will you help me with a student? You can assist and I'll have my student." And I say, "Sure." And I don't think I'd worn my watch. Rian comes around and I'm assisting and he drops the line and he says, "Zans, can you go check how deep the line is?" I go down. I come back up. I'm like, "It's at 20 meters. And he says, "Great." And he says, "Will you buddy my student?" And I buddy his student up and down. He drops the line again and he says, "Zans, can you go check where the line is?" I'm like, "Oh, it's 28 meters." I had never been 28 meters deep, but I was calm as a cucumber. It was the most easy thing. Check, come up, you're at 28 meters. Anyway, he carries on with the students. He drops the line again. And he says, "Zan, can you go check how deep the line is?" The line was at 32 or 33 meters. It was crazy. Anyway, so again, I just surface and I'm like, it was 32 meters. He starts screaming. I start crying. And I couldn't believe that out of all of those moments when I'd stopped counting, the magic unfolded. And just like that, I had found my mastery. And he said, "I knew when I arrived that there was a different woman inside of you. I don't know what is going on, but you're not the woman I last saw in Sodwana." And that was incredible.
I'm trying to imagine this experience of yours and what the achievement might feel like. What's different about you now that you've got mastery, now that you've gone to those depths?
I used to be so afraid of the free fall. I could never let my body just go. I would always just mid free fall, I'd hold on to the rope and start ascending again. But the moment you can let that free fall happen, I don't know what it is. I think it's a mixture. It's release. It's detaching from anything and everything. It's just listening to the line as your fingers are just passing through it. All there is the line, and maybe you hear a little bit of the sea crackling, whale song. There's only you. I don't know how to explain it. You scuba dive to see the ocean world. You free dive to dive into yourself. And the deeper you go, the more of you there is to find. And it feels expansive. It feels like the moon. It feels like the night sky. I don't know. It feels freeing.
It's not being the tourist to see what's down there anymore. Not exclusively.
Not exclusively. And I mean, I've had such incredible encounters with marine life on freedive because everything gets closer to you and you get to play with dolphins and you get to have incredible encounters. But when you're on the line and you're doing depth, there's only you to be found, your biggest fears. You need to work your head because all your fears will show up in that free fall if you don't know how to manage yourself, manage your fears, manage your head, your emotions, your panics. Once you're at 30 meters, if you look up, it is the biggest body of water you have ever seen in your life. And so it's a mixture of just managing yourself and just being present. If you're present, don't look up. It will start a whole new panic because at the same time at 30 meters, your chest is just doing this. It's just this thud. Your body wants to breathe. Your body wants to breathe. And you have to tell your body, hold on, ma'am, not yet. And it's a not yet finning all the way back up to 30 meters. And so there's just so much of you to be found.
How long's your longest holding of the breath? I mean, are we talking 2 minutes, 3 minutes?
4 minutes 45.
That's possible.
Yes, and even more is possible. Like, I think the lady's record at a point was 8 minutes, and I think that's like 9 minutes now.
Do you feel oxygen deprivation? Do you feel it in the way you're thinking?
Yes, if you stay down too long. So generally when we do depth, you don't really push past your limits, right? If I can hold my breath for 4 minutes, I'm diving for 2 minutes because it's a working breath hold, right? It's a working breath hold. So you're always managing yourself. If I end up staying for 2.5 minutes, then you begin to move past the place where your body cannot tell that its oxygen levels have gone below your ability to function, and then your body will obviously just black out. So when you are low on oxygen, it starts with the tingles in your toes, in your fingers. But I've never blacked out, thank heaven. But I think there's so much responsibility in the freediving community to not push your limits, especially at depth, because you put other people in danger.
That kind of self-mastery, how can that help a diver when on land?
Breath is the only thing there is in life for me. To understand the fullness of its power came with learning to breathe. When I started speaking to big audiences, I used to be so afraid. I could feel like my heart just so afraid. And I would just come home to my breath, to deep belly breaths. And my butterflies, and I'm scared, I go back to my breath. When I'm angry, I go back to my breath. You just begin to see it everywhere. When you're on a bicycle and you're going on an uphill and the uphill is hard, it's how you place your breath that allows you to be successful on that climb. And so for me, breath is everything.
You have been beautifully descriptive about your own personal experience, but you're wanting to put your arm around other people and particularly within the Black community and lead people to this activity. What is it that you're trying to accomplish there?
So where I come from, it is always said that when you walk into a room and you're the only one there who is Black, you need to open the door and make sure that you bring others with you. And so when I became a freediving instructor, my first order of business was to say, how can I expand this world into my community? So I've got the certificate. What am I going to do with it? I know I don't want to work in a dive shop. And how do I get more Black people into the water? I want to bridge the gap. I want to change the narratives that we hold around water. I don't want people saying the ocean is white people things. I want it to be everyone's thing. I want to expand the dreams that kids have about things that are possible. But most importantly, I want to build a reconnection, almost like a remembering of the good guardians that we used to be. I really want to bring forth a new generation of ocean guardians that look at the water, that look at the ocean and feel a connection and feel a sense of ownership and feel a sense of being key stakeholders to the future of these oceans. And so the whole idea says, could I bring the kids out so that they see what lives in there, so that they understand what we're trying to protect? And could I let them feel the beautiful freedom that I feel when I'm at sea? Because I know how hard it can be growing up as a Black child in the midst of poverty, violence, abuse, drugs. There's so many things that are going on. Could there be a place that you go to be silent and to be free? And in that freedom, the ocean beckons you to become a guardian to her. You don't get to enjoy her and not come back and take care of her in every way you can.
In what ways are you a guardian? How do you do that?
You advocate for her protection. When I think of South Africa, it is saying, what do we allow in our waters? Do we allow for drilling in our waters? How are we using our voices to protect our oceans? How are we educating about single-use plastic? How do we find ways to ensure that we don't encourage overfishing in our communities? How are we ensuring that in our communities, we're doing better?
I'm wondering if there's a bridge for you between conservation and the worship you were talking about earlier.
There's definitely a bridge. Conservation talks to us being good guardians, being good stewards. You guard sacred places. To be present is to be in worship. To actively be present in working to protect our oceans. That is worship. It is how we show up to protect the things that we love. Thank you for raising that. It's beautiful. So for me, it's a mixture of education and seeing what lives under there as a means to thread change into society.
The Black Mermaid Foundation works to help kids catch the vision of what's actually down there under the water worth guarding. It is indeed a process of education, one child at a time. Here's just one example of what can take place on an excursion to the sea with elementary school-aged children.
And this one girl is shaking, like she is shaking. And I'm like, it's okay, it's okay. For me, the win with every single kid is getting them to look beneath the surface because they are always afraid. And so we kind of count down to 3. She looks underneath, she comes back up, then we count up to 5 this time. And at the end of our second or third count, she looks up and she says, it's a starfish. Her eyes then went from being fearful to being big and filled with wonder. And I think for me, that's all I ever hope to do, to just place these little coins of magic and awe around the ocean. I think curiosity expands our world. I think fear shrinks our worlds. Fear will show you all the things that could go wrong, but fear is not the only emotion in the room. There's always excitement, curiosity. There's so many emotions, but fear gets to hold the big whip because fear says, if you don't put us in danger, then we'll never ever have to experience this. But I have this big belief that you have to tell fear that, hey, I see you, but sit down. You're not the only one in the room. I don't want to only hold you as I move forward into the space. And I think that's how we expand into curiosity. Your curiosity always has to be bigger than your fear. And in curiosity is awe. Awe keeps your soul alive. It lets you see the light in another's eyes. It lets you be present to the gift of every single moment.
Zandile Ndhlovu is founder of the Black Mermaid Foundation. Her children's book, Zandi's Song, is out in the U.S. March 2024. This episode of Constant Wonder was produced by Tenery Taylor with help from Mamie Teeples. Sound designed by James Call. Thanks to you for joining with us today. I'm Marcus Smith. Constant Wonder is a production of BYU Radio.